Hey, what's happening? Welcome to another podcast. My guest today is Caitlin Thompson. She has a company called EntheoZen that sells supplements, and the supplements are basically based on helping people have a calmer mind, which I think probably a lot of people could use. So that's pretty cool. And she knows her stuff. She definitely educated me in this podcast. We talk a lot about gut health and the nervous system, which Caitlin has a lot of information on. And she's also studied mood disorders for quite a while. And she's also recently been to a Vipassana retreat, which is like silent meditation. So we talk about that too, which was pretty interesting. And yeah, she's also had a lot of experience with psychedelics herself. So we talk about psychedelic drug use as well, and lots of other cool things. So thanks, Caitlin, for speaking with me. Hope we can do it again. And thanks for listening.
It's about love, not cash. Stealing money from the poor's a bit rash. Line your pockets, fill your tanks with your rockets. Look at it, we just can't stop it. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Just don't become late. That's the only rule. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. Loving your neighbour with bombs is wrong. All been going on way too long.
Talking about serotonin levels and dopamine and things and how that affects people's mood. And I've been thinking about it in this sort of chicken or the egg kind of way. Like, what comes first? Like, if something really bad happens to someone, say your girlfriend dumps you, you lose your job, you're going to feel like shit. You're going to feel terrible. And then if you were to measure your, say, dopamine levels or something in that moment, they're going to drop. They're going to be low. I assume. I don't really know. I assume physically you're going to have less dopamine or whatever in your system when you feel sad. And then the opposite being true, if you ask a girl out and she says yes and wants to go out with you, you feel awesome, you feel great, or you get a promotion at your job or something. Those things are in turn going to trigger a raise in these things.
Right.
So my question that has to do with sort of the supplements that you offer is like, is it possible that someone is so low in the building blocks to create serotonin, because your body produces it, but it has to produce it from something. It can't create something out of nothing. So can someone be so low in things like 5-HTP or whatever, whereas when something good happens that they don't actually get this bump, this raise in these levels?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mood and emotional state is really a synergy of physiological things and psychological things that are co-creating an experience of a conscious being. And, like you said, like if something shitty happens to you, if your dog dies or something, you're going to really feel that. And like, I think a lot of people would agree that there is a very real physiological, biochemical response from an emotional event. And so there is a physical effect from social dynamics or external events that are occurring. But then it also goes both ways, like you were describing, where if their chemistry is so off that they're depleted, maybe they're deficient in neurotransmitters, maybe their body can't make them because they're not getting enough nutrients, like the building blocks, such as tryptophan or tyrosine or the amino acids, or they don't have enough vitamins to actually convert them, or they have some sort of chronic stressor that's actually causing their nervous system to be inflamed and compromising how the brain is working together. And that also produces depression and anxiety symptoms. And it is hard to say what came first, the chicken or the egg,
right?
Because they both feed into each other. And sometimes what can happen is you can have an emotional trauma or stressor that initiates this biochemical response, and then you get stuck and then you become depressed. And even though things are getting better in life, your brain is just stuck in this chronic, depressed, deficient, imbalanced state.
Right.
And it's not able to necessarily pull itself out. And so even though life's getting better, you're not feeling happy again.
Right. I guess that's kind of the definition of what it is to be depressed. Hey, like it's just you can't pull out of it. Like no matter what's going on around you, it seems like you're just in this fog or in that state, like you're just spiraling down. And it's funny,
Yeah.
I've experienced levels of depression for sure. And it's funny, I do think about it like a spiral, and that things just sort of compound on top of each other. And it's funny to think about that. Maybe part of that is the physical, what's happening in your body and not being able to reach these states chemically. Like, it's kind of a funny thing. I usually think about things in a more psychological way, but I think it's obviously real that we have physical bodies that need certain things to operate at their maximum capacity, or their, things like that.
Sure. Like one good example that I've personally experienced a lot and still struggle with is I'm so reactive to a lot of different foods that create like an inflammatory response. And for me, the effects are primarily neurological and psychiatric. So, for example, if I eat a piece of cheese, I want to kill myself for the next 3 days. Like, all I think about is how hopeless and depressed my life is and how it's never going to get better, even though before I ate the cheese, everything was fine and nothing had changed. And just being able to observe how profoundly and acutely even just eating an inflammatory food can set me off. And when my chemistry is messed up from said food that I've eaten, my brain actually makes up stories to try to understand why it's feeling depressed. It's really interesting.
Oh yeah.
And when you have like a higher you're conscious of your higher self, and you're able to look down and really observe your behavior mindfully, and you see these patterns of, oh, when I eat this food, or when I eat this like sugary thing or whatever, then all of a sudden the days afterwards, I feel really irritable. I feel like I'm looking for reasons to be angry at people that really aren't justified when I really take a closer look. And so I think there's a lot of ways that food and environment is actually affecting people's brain chemistry and kind of hijacking their emotional centers in their brain, and together with their psychological brain and their biochemical brain, they're creating these stories about what they have to be depressed about, when it could just be something like they're reacting to pizza or whatever.
That's funny. I like that idea, because that's something I do believe in a lot, is just this idea that we create stories to like rationalize why things are happening or what we're feeling and stuff. That's something we definitely do, like sort of subconsciously. We just tell ourselves these little stories about why things are the way they are, and that's kind of how we operate. But so what is it about cheese? Like, are you like actually like lactose intolerant or something, or is you just feel like cheese has like a response in your body that you don't like?
Well, actually, dairy is a huge problem for a lot of people, and many people don't realize it. I'm sure you're aware of the gluten-free trend, which, that's become a popular diet, but kind of for good reason, because they're finding, especially with mood disorders and brain pathology, that foods like wheat and dairy really are kind of pouring gasoline on the fire that's going on in these people's bodies. And so the gluten protein and the casein protein, which is in dairy, they are almost identical. They're almost like analogs to each other. So people tend to be reacting to both. And both of them are actually opioids. And
Really?
so they bind to opioid receptors in the brain and can kind of screw things up, and they can also produce addictive behavior in the same way that an opiate can.
That's cool. I'd never heard of that before. I do know that for sure. Like I pretty much, I don't eat very much dairy now. I made that choice, and I couldn't even tell you exactly why. Probably for lots of these little reasons or feelings, like I don't react well to it, or just being kind of weirded out knowing there's a lot of hormones in milk and stuff like that. It makes me kind of feel like I don't want to have it. But once in a while, like there was a couple weeks ago, I ordered a pizza, and so that was like the gluten and the cheese going, like huge cheesy pizza. And afterward, I felt terrible. I felt awful. And I hadn't really ate pizza for a while. And man, it was not worth it at all for me. It slowed me down. Like I had all these plans, right? I ate pizza at like 4 o'clock, like pretty early. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to come back home, have a little bite to eat, then go do all this work. And as soon as I ate that pizza, I just crashed on my couch and couldn't move. Was just in basically a coma for the rest of the evening. And it really didn't feel good.
Yeah, I mean, wheat and dairy are technically toxic, and really the difference in how they affect people is that person's sensitivity or kind of their body's ability to mitigate the damage. Because
Hmm.
really everything is mildly toxic. You know, the difference between medicine and poison is dosage,
Right.
really.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I've talked about before with drugs and stuff too. You can, put enough salt in your body and it'll kill you.
Yeah, same with water, which is, absolutely crucial for life. So I like to point that out that I'm not trying to demonize any sort of foods,
Right.
but it's really about what's that individual's tolerance. Like, and if they have a bunch of other issues, maybe they have a chronic infection or, microbiome dysbiosis, or they have a stressful job, eventually the cup kind of gets full and
Hmm.
your body is already holding down the fort, trying to resist all these assaults. And
Right.
maybe it just isn't quite able to cope with the toxicity of the dairy or the sugar or the, hot chili pepper or whatever.
Right. It's like creating creating this compound stresses that are just coming in different ways, and when you get to a certain point, there's a
Yeah.
breaking point. So if you it's
Yeah.
just like trying to help. I don't really like using the word optimize. Like optimize is thrown around so much these days and all this stuff like biohacking, all this stuff, but it's not really my thing. But yeah, like just trying to optimize certain things, levels in the body so that you can at least your body can deal with, because really we live in, like, you could say, like toxic environments. No matter what, the world
Yeah.
is coming at us 100%. We're always fighting off little things here and there on our skin or whatever. Like things are moving and changing all the time, and so our bodies are naturally equipped to defend us and to fight off things here and there, but obviously there's levels, and
Sure. You
yeah.
can only take so much. Eventually there's a straw that breaks the camel's
Yeah.
back. And I think we're seeing that a lot with the increase in autoimmune conditions, because that's ultimately what causes it, is like a number of chronic stressors. And finally the body is like, I can't hold the fort down anymore.
Mm.
And then, the body starts going berserk, the immune system's confused. And I really believe that that same mechanism of that chronic inflammatory response is in part what's driving a lot of the mental health epidemics as
Mm.
well. And like you said, we live in a toxic world. It's socially toxic. It's stressful. We're working too much. We're less connected to each other. So
Mm.
there's a lot of reasons why depression is on the rise and why
Right.
autoimmune conditions are on the rise.
I wouldn't mind talking about autoimmune a little bit. You talk about that in your talks pretty often, and I've looked into it a little bit. I don't know that much about it, but autoimmune basically is the idea that your immune system is fighting itself or fighting your own body, like it's not fighting the right thing. So why do you think that happens?
Yeah, so it's a lot of different things, but
Mm-hmm.
basically when your body is so bombarded with challenges, your immune system becomes a bit trigger happy,
Hmm.
and it can also become depleted and not really have the resources to make intelligent decisions about its strategy.
Hmm.
But it feels a sense of urgency, because obviously if you have some sort of chronic immune challenging thing, then it's like, man, we got to really send out our troops, even though we are totally exhausted from years of having this chronic immune response or whatever.
Hmm.
So things just start to get a little cattywampus
Hmm.
because it's it's depleted and under stress. And also compromised intestinal permeability is a huge driver of this as well. A lot of people know that as leaky gut.
Hmm.
And basically what happens is the very thin membrane lining your gut, it's supposed to be really selective in what type of molecules get intentionally transported through that membrane and into the bloodstream.
Hmm.
And for example, you wouldn't want bacteria that's on your food to just go straight into your bloodstream. That would give you a blood infection, which could be very dangerous.
Hmm.
So your body has this mechanism of a barrier of deciding what molecules are deemed safe and ready
Right.
to, like nutrients mostly. Okay, we've munched up this protein into a bunch of amino acids. We're ready to incorporate it into the tissues. Let's put it in the bloodstream and circulate it around. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that contribute to this barrier being compromised, and you end up getting what's, like I said, leaky gut. And the tight junctions in between the cells that hold it together, they start to get loosened and damaged by a variety of things, such as pesticides, the gluten protein, microbial organism overgrowths such as candida or other bacterial overgrowths in the gut. They can cause this leakiness. And then what happens is you're eating food and undigested fragments of the food are just going through these giant gaping holes instead of being properly dissected into smaller pieces. And so next thing you know, you have, say you're eating blueberries or something, and instead of the blueberries being digested and then incorporated into the body in these little tiny broken down pieces, you're getting chunks of undigested like protein fragments, and it's just going straight into the bloodstream. And the body is like, this does not belong here. This is, I'm not identifying this as something that we okayed to come into the bloodstream. It must be an invader. Let's send an immune response and attack it. And when this is happening chronically, every time you eat, you start to develop food sensitivities because your body is now learning that every time you eat blueberry, these foreign invaders are coming into the bloodstream. And so the second you put that blueberry in your mouth, all of a sudden you have a food reactivity to it.
That's really interesting, actually. It makes me think about food allergies and things like that. I was just, before I keep going, I think maybe if you can push your mic back a little bit, possibly. I feel like it might just be crackling a little bit. Now I can't turn my side down anymore. But yeah, this idea. So I wonder, like, just thinking about it now, is someone's allergic to like peanuts or something. It's funny that maybe they're just not able to digest them properly for whatever reason. And that could be like, yeah, I don't know, creating that so that every time they eat them, their body learns that this it's not being digested properly. So we're just going to outright have a breakout or something.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little different with a true allergy versus a sensitivity. In both of those cases, the immune system is responding in a way that's producing undesired effects. But for example, in like a peanut allergy where someone can go into anaphylactic shock, they have a IgE-mediated antibody response. So that's like a true allergy where someone can swell up and die.
You're right.
Whereas a food sensitivity is usually IgG or IgA-mediated immunoglobulin response. And that tends to be more of a long-term cascade of inflammatory events.
Right. Okay.
And it won't produce anaphylactic shock in the same way. And for some reason, people feel like one is valid and one is not. They go, oh, it's not a true allergy.
Right, you're just sensitive.
And, you know,
poor baby.
Screw you. We can't accommodate your sensitivity or whatever. But that's really not fair because they're both medically legitimate things that are happening. They just take different immunological pathways that create different responses in the body, and one is more chronic.
Right. So that seems like, so that's one of the reasons your body could develop an autoimmune type of thing. I was thinking about it as well. Another thing I thought of is how we treat like cancer and sometimes what we do is we attack, like, say, the cancer, but we're also lowering the body's immune when we're really taking a big physical toll out of people's bodies when they're going through some of these cancer treatments that are really physically exhausting. And it seems like we're not exactly perfect at like highlighting just the cancer cells either, that we often will target kind of more things as well. I wonder if that's similar at all to what the body's doing.
Similar to the body. Yeah.
Like this autoimmune idea that it can be like attacking itself. Maybe it's kind of like if there's something it's trying to remove or kill in the body, that it's just like this idea that it's just like mass destruction.
Yeah, kind of blatant and unsophisticated, definitely.
Yeah, which sounds a bit odd that you think our body would be pretty good at that. It's a weird idea that our body could get to that level where, like you say, it's confused. It's like, how is our body confused? It's been doing this for so long. It's a funny idea that it would make these mistakes. Like it's kind of odd.
Right. Well, I mean, an autoimmune condition doesn't just develop overnight. Like, and a healthy body doesn't get confused. You know, it actually does a really good job. But when you have something that's compromising you over a long period of time, maybe you have a Lyme disease infection, or maybe Candida overgrowth, or maybe you have been allergic to some food, or maybe not allergic, but sensitive to some
Hmm.
food your whole life, and you didn't ever realize because you've been eating it since you were a baby. And it's like years and years and years of an inflamed environment that's going to wear you down over
Hmm.
time. And eventually, the body's going to get so tired and so depleted, it's not going to be able to function
Uh,
in a way that's intelligent, you know?
right,
And that's
right.
when you start getting the confused immune system. But by that point, your body has been trying pretty darn hard to keep things under control, and then eventually it just burns out.
Right. That makes sense. So yeah, like it makes sense to think about this as a more of a long-term thing, something that's happening over years to someone, that their body's getting to this point over a long period of time. And
Yeah,
one thing that was
absolutely.
interesting to me, just talking about like gut health and this kind of thing, is that I didn't really when you hear about like serotonin and serotonin receptors, I always think about it as being in the brain, like in the mind or in the head or something. But really, it seems like a lot of the serotonin receptors are actually in your gut. That's where you're
Mhm.
dealing with this stuff. I didn't even know that. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, before they even discovered serotonin as a neurotransmitter,
Hmm.
it was studied. It was discovered in the gut before anything else, and then it became this like neurotransmitter that
Yeah.
you know everyone knows about. But yeah, a lot of the functions of serotonin are in modulating gut activity and actually in immune response,
Hmm.
which is one of the reasons why. I've been, really kind of proposing that we look closer at psychedelic compounds
Hmm.
as novel approaches to autoimmune conditions
Hmm.
because they work with the
Ah.
serotonergic receptors.
Right. And yeah, because they even I think how they discovered serotonin was through LSD, from what I remember
Yeah,
hearing.
that definitely helped. Yeah,
Yeah, and even so, like it's because of the terminology, I guess. Neurotransmitter. I think of neuro, I think of the brain, and so when I hear
right.
that, I think of even when like you've studied neurobiology, but that's actually the study of the nervous system. Is that right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, on kind of like a more molecular level.
Because when I hear neurobiology again, I just think of the brain right away. I think, oh, she's like studying the brain, but it's like not exactly. That's not exactly right.
Right. And then the enteric nervous system, which is basically the nervous system of the gut, you know that there's more neurons or like nerve cells
Hmm.
in the gut than there are in your spinal cord.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
see,
and your
that's
spinal
crazy.
cord's like a thick, bundle of nervous system tissue,
Hmm.
and there's about the same amount in your, weaving in your entire digestive tract. So it definitely gets overlooked a lot that the gut is an extension of the nervous system and also the lymphatic system and the
Hmm.
immune system.
Right. So, what is going back to what you mentioned just a second ago about looking at psychedelics and their role with the serotonergic system in the gut health? What have you found in looking into that?
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of research looking at serotonin's role in immune modulation and inflammation. And so
Hmm.
that's pretty well established in the literature. And so I thought, well, we know that these psychedelics are binding to serotonin receptors too. And from personal and anecdotal experience, I found that I was getting a lot of relief from chronic inflammation and autoimmune problems with psychedelic use. And I started to kind of look into it. And unfortunately, no one's really clinically looking at it yet, but there are a few papers that exist that are even proposing the idea. So I'm glad someone else is kind of
Hmm.
onto this with me.
Right.
Um, but if you look at some of the effects modulated by the serotonergic receptors, and there have been a handful of like rat studies or in vitro
Hmm.
um, where in like a test tube or whatever,
Hmm.
where they look at these psychedelic compounds affecting pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are basically things that promote inflammation in the body. They're molecules that trigger inflammation.
Okay.
And so there is some evidence that, these could be novel anti-inflammatory drugs someday.
Hmm. And so which compounds were they studying or looking at?
So, I know for sure like DOB or the
Hmm.
DOX series, which are analogs to LSD.
Hmm.
So again, you can't necessarily make any claims or draw any conclusions because that's a different compound than
Right.
LSD is. I think we've also seen some reduction in things like tumor necrosis factor, TNF alpha, which is a pretty common pro-inflammatory molecule. And we've seen reductions in that with LSD. We've seen that with DMT.
Right. So
And
these, when you're talking about like in vitro studies, so it's not like you're not studying people. So it's not. So you're removing
right,
sort of this idea that it could be like a psychological response because this is just studying like molecule on molecule, like putting LSD like substances in with whatever, and then seeing how it reacts to each other.
sure. And some of the rat studies show more complex things like reduction of these inflammatory biomarkers. So at least there's that. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's like basically an untouched area of research. And I am working on a literature review right now because I really think some people need to start to,
Mm.
put the dots together so that we can get funding to move forward in this
Right.
specific field. And my hope is that, in the next year or so, I'll actually be able to start, a funded, approved clinical trial
Hmm.
that looks at something really simple like inflammation biomarkers in response to psychedelic treatment, or even if it's an observational study, see if there is a correlation. Maybe I follow a bunch of people that go drink ayahuasca
Mm.
in Peru where it's not illegal,
Yeah.
and that way I don't have to go through all the FDA, DEA
Oh
hoops,
yeah, yeah. The hoops, the years of hoops.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, they make it hard for sure.
yeah, that's one of the biggest issues with this stuff being illegal. Like you said, is people can't study it hard, like basically at all, or they have to go through so much expensive processes to get to this point where they're allowed to study it. Like MAPS has had to go through so much and really raise millions of dollars in order to even get approval. And yeah, that's one of the biggest problems with this. We don't know the medical benefits because we're not allowed to look. It's really
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And it really is more about money than government control because
Hmm.
if you have enough money, you can get
Right.
the DEA and FDA on board. But it's really about not enough funding these days.
Yeah, but I mean that highlights a bigger issue going on in lots of areas right now. Is money's the top of everything right now. You want to win a legal battle? Well, you better have millions of dollars. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, well, it's hard to find people that want to put forward a lot of money for a drug that can never be patented or
Yeah,
marked
right.
up. So
Right,
that's the issue.
Yeah. So going back to talking about inflammation, like that's something that's come up a lot. Like I've been sort of loosely researching diet and physical health and stuff just for my own sake over the years. And inflammation is something that comes up a lot, and that like a lot of these foods that are bad for people, it seems like they're bad for people because they lead to inflammation of different areas of the body. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say virtually most of modern diseases, inflammation is a driving factor. You look at cancer and diabetes and autoimmune conditions and Crohn's and psychiatric conditions and a whole cohort of things. And all of them seem to have inflammation in common. And it's just inflammation is like the messenger kind of. It means something is wrong,
Right?
And it does cause some damage on its own as a result. But you can treat inflammation with drugs or herbs and stuff, and it is good to reduce the inflammation because it does have damaging consequences. But you really need to figure out why is this person's body inflamed, and that's something that modern medicine doesn't do really well, is to address what the root causes.
The why.
They just keep treating the symptom of the inflammation, but you really have to figure out why is the body chronically inflamed.
Right. So like, what does it mean if something is inflamed? Like if something is like, it's just say you can have specific parts, and like say your nose is inflamed. Is it like hot and red and or what?
Yeah, I mean, what it means on like a molecular level is that there has been damage done to some area of the tissue. Maybe I smacked my hand or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's some amount of damage, and the body's immune system wants to go to that area in order to protect the damaged area
Right.
and repair it. So it's a really important human function. Inflammation plays a really important role,
Mm-hmm.
but when inflammation just kind of goes rampant and never stops, it has a cost because inflammation, the process of inflammation creates oxidative stress as a byproduct. It creates free radical compounds, which I'm sure you and many listeners know, create oxidative stress and aging or damage to cells. And
What's so oxidative? When I hear that, like I think of like metal rusting.
Mhm,
Is that like
exactly.
similar?
Yeah. So that's what free radicals do to our bodies essentially. And luckily, we make antioxidant molecules to combat this. That way we don't just rust and die,
Mm.
really quickly. But sometimes if we have rampant inflammation and we're generating all these free radical byproducts that are damaging tissue more, and then the immune system's coming and inflaming the area because the tissue's damaged, and then you have more byproducts, and you get stuck in this vicious cycle, which is why when you break your ankle or something and it's swollen, you ice it because you're trying to disrupt that inflammatory cycle that can kind of spiral out of control.
Right. And yeah, what they recommend, like that, yeah, like that's when I think about inflammation, that's actually what I think of because I've had some sports injuries, like tore my hamstring and stuff like that. And then the area gets inflamed. And what they recommend is you don't just keep ice on it forever because it's not like all inflammation is bad. You kind of ice
Right.
on and off, like every 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. It's kind of what I was told is how you want to do it. And yeah, like you're not trying to remove all inflammation because like you said, it's there for a reason to protect that damaged area. But if I tear my hamstring playing soccer, I know why I know why that area was damaged. But if you have
Right.
like something inflamed somewhere else in your body, I guess the question is, well, why is my liver inflamed or something? Like why is this area getting that
Yeah.
response?
And systemic inflammation is definitely a real thing. And actually a lot of our regulatory processes of monitoring inflammation in the body comes from the microbiome. It comes from the organisms that live there. It comes from the foods that we're putting in our gut that are also interacting with the organisms that live there. And it also comes from the nervous system. So really the gut and the nervous system are fundamental to all aspects of health. And I really believe that a lot of the time those are the two areas that need to be addressed to downstream correct other things.
Right. And so how do you look at correcting that area? It's a lot of it must be the food we eat, I guess. If it's the gut, that's what the gut does, right?
Yeah, I mean, what foods we eat basically feeds what organisms live in our gut, and the microbial populations that live there and the variety of species is so crucial to all of our health status. And so diet is really important. And then also like a nervous system retraining. So things like meditation or qigong or breath work or neurofeedback training, or even just not being under chronic stress. Like those are all ways that we can promote a healthy nervous system that is operating efficiently. And that's also going to affect the microbiome because we have that vagal nerve where the microbiome and the brain communicate with each other back and forth. And so if the nervous system is screwed up, the gut can get compromised. And we see that a lot with people with emotional trauma, such as like childhood abuse or PTSD. They tend to develop gut problems and autoimmune conditions because the nervous system gets kind of chaotic and compromises the body's microbiome environment, the inflammation pathways, the immune response, because we know now that those are modulated by the nervous system. So that's another area that I'm quite fascinated with is the effects of psychological and emotional trauma, and how that actually can manifest into these physical chronic diseases.
It's funny how it seems like if you go deep enough into any of these physical problems, you end up seeing that it's all connected. Like if you want to have a healthy gut, well, you need to have a healthy mind, and you got to have, you know, all this stuff seems to relate to each other, which is, it's like there's no easy way out. It's like, oh, you know, oh, I got to fix my microbiome in my gut. Oh, so I got to go meditate, and I got to like eat healthy, and I got to, it's like, you got to do it all. You got to you want to be healthy, you got to be healthy everywhere.
Yeah, it really takes a holistic approach. And, you know, in Western medicine, we tend to focus on organ systems or, you know, specific areas of the body.
Everything.
Yeah, but that's not really how it works.
Yeah, it seems like it. Well, it's funny too. You froze. Are you still there? Oh, there you are. Oh yeah,
I'm there.
You're back. You're back. I was thinking about something you said there, like just thinking about the microbiome and how, I forget what you said there, but like feeding things in your microbiome. And I had heard, I don't even know where I heard this, someone was talking about how people who crave a lot of sugar might have like a lot of yeast or something in their body, and then it's actually the yeast in their body that wants the sugar, so they're like creating a response in the person's mind somehow to like go eat sugary foods or something, which is like, that like blows my mind kind of. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so, you know, these organisms that thrive on certain foods, they want to reward us for feeding them the foods that help them proliferate. And a lot of times, because we're eating these high sugar diets these days, we're feeding organisms that thrive on sugars, and they tend to overgrow and overdominate other strains of bacteria that also play a really fundamental role. And they actually will do things like release neurotransmitters like dopamine to reward us for feeding them the food that they like. And then that's how you become addicted to sugar, because they are literally hijacking your brain and making you feed them what they want to eat.
That's so crazy to think about. You have like little conscious sort of entities in you, like tiny little microscopic things that are sending signals to you like in that way. Like it's just, that's amazing. But I guess that also relates to the fact that you were talking about how in your gut you have sort of I don't know how you put it, nerve endings or things that people that the things can send signals to get to your brain through your gut. Like it's all interconnected in the nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So okay, let's talk about the mental side of this stuff. And I just want to ask you about the little would you call it a retreat, or the Vipassana excursion that you went on? Tell people, maybe tell people what that is first, because I didn't really know exactly what that was.
Yeah, so Vipassana is a specific style of meditation. I believe it came from Tibet. I am not a meditation expert by any means. This was my first meditation experience really ever. And so like typically, like you said, it's a 10-day thing. I opted to do a 6-day one because I don't have anything to prove. And I didn't, in the past, I have pushed myself physically too hard, following traditional protocols like with certain ayahuasca and other types of experiences. And I had the mental discipline to push through, but it was detrimental to my physical health.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I just went with a shorter one, just to be good to myself, because I knew that chronic pain and inflammation is an issue for me personally. So I had a wonderful experience, and I actually went with my romantic partner, which was challenging but really wonderful to share that experience. Because what
you guys have to do, like when you're talking about how hard it is, it's because you're sitting, like meditating basically all day. You get a couple meals a day, right? You're not fasting as well.
No, yeah, we get 3 square meals a day.
Okay.
And yeah, for the most part, it was like 16 and a half hours of meditation every day. We started at like 6 a.m. and ended at like 9:30 p.m. And even when we're eating, we're encouraged to be mindfully eating. And we did have some walking meditation, so we weren't sitting all day. And luckily, there were like hiking trails, so even though at points I was supposed to be walking mindfully, I was like, screw this, I need to run. And like I would go jogging in secret.
Oh yeah.
But
that seems
it
legit,
really helped keep my body happy, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So, and is the idea that you're not speaking at all the whole time? Is that right?
Pretty much. I mean, there are a couple of opportunities where you meet with the teachers in small groups and ask any questions or share any concerns or whatever. And if you're having an issue, you can talk, but generally you don't make eye contact. You don't speak with anybody. You pretty much just ignore everybody.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of nice at mealtime. You don't have to make small talk
Right.
with a
Yeah.
bunch of strangers.
But the idea is to really get you in touch with your mind, your consciousness, and really focus. The focus is like on that. Like, let's not try to talk to everyone around you. Let's focus internally. So how was it explained to me is that
Exactly.
you start out with like the person who I met who had done this said that she started out the first maybe couple of days by just you focus on your breath in and out. Your mind drifts. You go back to the breath. Think about have your awareness on the fact that you're just breathing. And you go back and forth. And then after that, she explained it became about focusing on the body and up and down the body.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of different ways, different styles of meditation. And yeah, I think as long as you're, putting in effort in quieting the mind, it's hard to do it wrong. Because even if you're not like really getting exactly where you want to be as far as your level of being distracted or whatever, like just doing it is the most important part.
Right. You learn by doing it, and you create that sort of habit in your head in order to do that in the future, to be able to go.
Yeah, that's why they call it a
focus.
practice.
Right. Yeah. That you have to keep doing it as well. Right.
Yeah.
So what sort of things came up when you do something like this? How does it feel?
Yeah, a lot of things came up, and unfortunately, I was not allowed to write anything down or, journal really. So I think a lot of it kind of just got put into my subconscious memory.
Right, sure.
But definitely a lot of opportunity for insight, and also just like really feeling into the default state of my nervous system. Like for me personally, in my health journey, my biggest bane of my existence has been a nervous system that is stuck in a chronic sympathetic stress response. And that originates from some childhood trauma that turned into, again, like physical manifestation of autoimmune illness. And so my nervous system is just like ready to flee from a lion all the time. And I've done a tremendous amount of work, and I've slowly been kind of taking the edge off. But the meditation retreat really just like put me on a whole nother level of being able to tone down my nervous system. And in that quietness, I was able to really feel like this sense of urgency that's always underlying everything that I do. Like I need to walk everywhere really fast, even though I have nowhere to be, or I don't have to necessarily get to an end goal. So that was interesting. And also, like I said, I was there with my partner, and things are going really great in our relationship. He just moved in with me, like happy couple. But something about ignoring your partner and having them ignore you,
right?
It
being there
created
together.
This, like, story. It I got actually kind of depressed and felt really, really rejected by him. Because we would see each other but then not really acknowledge each other.
Yeah, that would be strange. I could imagine how weird that would be. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like we were like estranged lovers that were just pretending like we didn't like each other anymore or something.
Right.
I created these stories about like oh, he doesn't love me anymore, and I knew that wasn't true.
Right.
I intellectually knew, but it was evoking this weird insecurity in me. And then come to find that he was actually having the exact same experience with me, where he was all sad and felt rejected and stuff.
That's interesting. So that's sort of like, that's pretty cool then. So you can be in that state though, if you can go back and forth between those thoughts and then the mindfulness of those thoughts, you can kind of see, like you said before, how those stories come up, and we tell ourselves these stories to make sense of what's happening. It's interesting.
Yeah. And so, there's all these sort of like insightful personal growth benefits, but I would say just like the best thing that I've gotten from it is feeling like I made a lot of progress in retraining the nervous system to just be cool, because I think that's the stem of a lot of my own health problems, are a nervous system that is just in this panic mode all the time, and it's kind of screwing everything downstream up, like the
So, yeah, I
immune
want to talk
modulation.
about what it means to be in that panic mode. You called it sympathetic or something?
Right, the sympathetic nervous
What does
system.
that mean?
So basically, there's like two modes that your nervous system can be in.
Hmm.
The sympathetic, which is like a stress response. Oh shit, there's a lion, I better run for it.
Hmm.
Or even like riding a roller coaster or giving a speech that you're nervous to present or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
It's basically a stress response that's
So the
designed to
sympathetic
protect you.
nervous system, that means the stress response area that you're in. That's the
Yeah, like it's basically flight or fight if you're
Right.
familiar with that term.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize it's called the sympathetic. It's a funny word for it, sympathetic, but yeah,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I know what that feels like. I've experienced that a lot in my life too. Just this constant like just this anxiety or this little like this nervousness, this butterflies. And I've just learned, I've kind of just become just like not even comfortable, but used to just dealing with it. Like I just at this point I just like do shit anyway. It's kind of how I like that's how I've adapted. It's just like, yep, I'm nervous as fuck. Time to do this. Here we go. Like it just sort of, and it maybe comes up more socially. Like it's maybe a more of a socially triggered thing. If I'm alone in my room, I don't tend to get very nervous, but if I'm out with a huge group of people, I might be more likely to have that trigger or whatever.
Sure. And then, on the opposite side is the parasympathetic nervous system, which really regulates like digestion and rest and all these immune system and all these other processes that, if you think about it, say you are being chased by a lion, digestion and immune system are not the priority. The priority is escaping in that short term. So the stress response, it burns through all of your glucose and energetic resources and sends them all to your muscles. It takes away, blood from the digestive organs and sends it to your heart, because really you just need your heart to pump, your lungs to breathe, and your legs to run. And all that other stuff is not important. We don't care about digesting food in the short term if we're not going to survive from the lion chasing us.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So that highlights then how if you're in that state all the time, your other areas are going to take a hit and they're going to become weak or not as, they're not going to be as active.
Exactly. Because we're not meant to be in that stress response for a long amount of time. We're supposed to run from the lion for 10 minutes, and then when it's done, we shake it off, and then we go back to, eating grass if we're a gazelle or something.
Yeah,
but when you go to work every day and that lion is your boss that you hate, then you never turn on the parasympathetic. Your digestion is compromised. Your immune system is compromised. Your ability to rest and repair tissue is compromised.
Right. Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's something I've talked about with a lot of other people in a different way. We talk about, say, people who work with people with psychedelics and talk about healing through psychedelics. And what I've come to sort of understand healing to even mean is sort of the ability to move freely through your life, but through these states, through emotions, not getting stuck. It's when we get stuck in a certain thing that it seems we get a lot of problems. And that's something I've become much better at too myself, like being able to, say, get really angry at someone and then after that, like drop it and go back to being calm again. Being able to go into these things, because sometimes emotions are useful and sometimes you do need to get angry at someone to show them, hey, I don't want you to do that, whatever you're doing anymore. It pisses me off. I don't like it. So you get to that point, you can have a conflict, you get into conflicts, and then you can go back down and not be stressed out and not be ramped up and whatever. But yeah, it seems like when people have that thing going on, like I used to have that for sure. I used to have bad anxiety. When my palms were just always sweaty, I'd always be like in sort of this weird state and I'd be like nervous to shake anyone's hand because I knew they were going to be like, oh, what's with your, what do you just go for a run? Like, what's going on? And it's just like this weird state you're in and you're kind of fluttery a little bit. It's not fun. And it's exhausting too. It's exhausting being stuck in any of those emotions, like anger too. If you're stuck being angry, it's exhausting. It takes a lot out of you. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a good little rant there. I don't know where I'm going to go from there. So So one thing we talked about before, so you have these products, so you've created this company. Maybe you could even talk a little bit about your company because we haven't even touched on that you have
Yeah.
these supplements.
Yeah. So I have a company called EntheoZen, which you guys probably noticed sounds very close to the word EntheoGen.
Yeah.
That was intentional. Again, trying to figure out how to marry my passions of psychedelics and holistic health, especially mental health. And so I started EntheoZen because basically my last like semester of college, so I had been partying and using psychedelics pretty consistently through college and going to Burning Man and going to Peru and drinking ayahuasca. Like I was living a pretty colorful
right. You
life.
Tried all the fun stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And as I started to get into like my really hard classes, like organic chemistry and biochemistry and statistics and stuff like that, I just took a little bit of a break from partying, and I noticed around the like 7th or 8th week after my last psychedelic experience or LSD dose, I would start to get increasingly like agitated and irritable and depressed and anxious and like just became more and more imbalanced. And it was very much like a physiological sensation because circumstantially nothing was changing. And I noticed this pattern. And it took me like 3 or 4 times to actually identify that this was correlated with my last LSD experience. And then I realized that I actually had, you know, depression or anxiety or whatever you want to call it my whole life, but I had been medicating with the psychedelics really effectively because my mom had been on antidepressants for 25 years, and I always thought like, oh, I'm so glad that I didn't get her depression. But really, I was just smoking marijuana and using psychedelics.
Right.
And it was working pretty well until I stepped back from those things and I was able to actually see the pathology emerge. And I became really determined to figure out what the root cause was and how to address it naturally, ideally without psychedelics, because you don't, you know, psychedelics are pretty sustainable, but I thought, well, I want to know why I'm imbalanced like this. So I started diving down into the scientific literature on mood disorders, and I found that nutrition was largely implicated in mood disorders, especially given that many essential vitamins and minerals and amino acids are fundamental to making neurotransmitters and also supporting brain health in general and nervous system function. So then I became kind of obsessed with that, and I thought like, man, how come no one else seems to like get this? Like I was reading all these papers, and at the time I wasn't like really aware of any good supplements that existed for people that implemented all of this scientifically recorded information into a product that was like tangibly useful to somebody to actually relieve their depression. So that's when I got the idea. I was like, you know, I want to start a business and make nutritional products that can take this science and make it actually make people's lives better. And so as soon as I graduated with my bachelor's, I graduated in like December, and basically 2 weeks later I had my LLC. I waited until January 2nd. I was waiting for the holidays, got my LLC going, and within 3 months I had manufactured my first products. And that was like almost 4 years ago. So a lot has happened since then as far as the development of my expertise and of the products and the business growing. But now we have a line of products that focus on brain and mood health, is what I'm allowed to say from the FDA, but primarily to relieve people's depression and anxiety. And, just providing a variety of scientifically studied vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and plant extracts that help provide their body with the resources to regulate itself and correct its own imbalances and find peace and vitality in their mood and brain health.
Right. Yeah. It seemed like when I heard about that, my first response or my first thing I thought of was like, it's similar to some of the Onnit products, some of the Onnit stuff. And I remember you right away were like, well, yeah, kind of, but like they're more focused on like getting you like, I don't even like heightened, like up to like this peak performance where you're just like, I want to help people be calm was kind of your thing.
Exactly. And you know, the nootropic industry is really exploding, and I am very familiar with Onnit, and I've met Aubrey Marcus before. And yeah, I have this, my take is exactly the same. It's like, okay, amping the nervous system up is great if you are looking for a performance enhancer or, you know, cognitive, you're trying to get a bunch of work done, but that's not really what people need. People have plenty of stimulants. Right. They have coffee, they have Ritalin, they have these nootropics, but what they don't have enough of is peace and calmness. And right. The nervous system is so amped up all the time. My goal is to make products that like bring it back down to homeostasis, where maybe it's not your peak performance supplement, right. But it's going to be more sustainable to actually keeping the hardware from crashing and burning, you know?
Right. You even say maybe more geared toward like recovery than like performance or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but
or even maintenance, like just it's really designed just to nourish the brain so that it's healthy, because that's ultimately the problem in depression and anxiety. So the brain is inflamed, it's depleted, it's deficient, some of the nerve structures are damaged or atrophying, and the body is not properly resourced to fix it all.
Right. So it's kind of like what we were saying before with this, like the idea that like your body doesn't have what it needs to produce what it needs, doesn't have enough stuff to produce these things. Is that kind of the idea, like supplement the building blocks kind of idea?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. That's one of the concepts that I apply to the product development, because you can't build a brick wall without bricks. So I have like pretty much 4 main principles that I've developed the products to meet. One, that's providing, filling any gaps of nutritional deficiencies, including vitamins and minerals that are cofactors in converting neurotransmitters to, you know, their end product, and also the amino acid precursors that you actually need to start with in order to make a neurotransmitter like serotonin and dopamine. So that's right. One. Two is basically eliminating, or not eliminating, but reducing the amount of inflammation in the nervous system, because that causes damage to neurons. And the mechanism that it causes damage that we discussed earlier is by oxidative stress. So that's the third one, is reducing the oxidative stress right. from damaging the neural structures. And then the fourth concept is actually promoting the repair and regeneration of the neural structures and whole neurons by upregulating neural growth factors such as brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And there are a number of nutrients and plant compounds and technologies that have been found to upregulate and promote this sprouting of dendrites and synapses and actually new neurons to restore damaged tissue.
It sounds like I've heard the word neurogenesis thrown around. Yeah. Is that kind of the same idea?
Absolutely the same concept.
Okay. Yeah, I remember I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast, and he was talking about it with Paul Stamets, and they were talking about some mushroom, lion's mane or something like that might. Yeah. And psilocybin has been talked about a lot as being able to do things like that for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are there
even like.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say even like exercise, and things like L-theanine or curcumin or blueberry extract upregulate those same growth factors that promote neurogenesis.
Right. And so my other question that I brought up before we started was just like, who would this stuff not work for? Kind of like one of the things I thought of was someone who just has a awful diet. Like if someone's just out there eating Big Macs and fried chicken and they don't really give a shit about their diet, this might not be their first step here. Like I don't know if like something like this might not be the biggest thing they can add to their lifestyle to help them out? Would it even help? Would it be noticeable at all for someone who has a really poor diet to take something like this?
It would be helpful, but you're absolutely right. And, the supplement, the point of it is not to replace pharmaceuticals and so that they're on this supplement for the rest of their life.
Right.
The point is to nourish the brain so that it can heal and rebalance. But at the end of the day, it's really only going to provide relief temporarily. And over long term, it'll definitely have benefits. But if the person doesn't change their diet, if they don't change their lifestyle, if they don't get their microbiome in order, because a lot of times that's actually the culprit that's propagating the brain symptoms, then they're going to continue to be depressed, and they're going to just be a little less depressed when they take the Transcend product.
Right.
So
right.
I really tell people, look, this is not the solution to your problem. It's something to mitigate your discomfort and your symptoms, and it will help encourage your brain to rebalance and be nourished. But at the end of the day, it takes a lot more work than just taking a couple pills every day to fully fix your chronic depression or whatever.
Yeah. And that's something that I think about, thinking about like classic antidepressants, like, I don't know, like Zoloft or something like that, or things that people are taking. I don't even know is Zoloft an antidepressant? I don't even know.
Yeah, Xanax, absolutely.
Stuff like that. When I think of it, I never really bought into this idea that you take something like that to like long term to fix, all of a sudden you're going to be not depressed for like the rest of your life if you take this thing. But where it seems like it can have a use is sort of like short term, to use this thing to pull yourself out of the state that you're in. Like we said before, you get stuck in this spiral state. You don't know how to get out. You just, even when something good happens, you don't feel happy. But if you can like give yourself a bit of a boost for a little while to just start working toward things that are going to help you long term, some real big changes in your life and things like that, that's where these things may have their most effect in my mind, is like helping someone take those first steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that antidepressants have a place. But there's also some studies they've done when you look at people that were getting some help for their depression, and they either got on an antidepressant or decided not to. If you look at where they are 6 months from there, you're actually more likely to be still depressed if you're on the antidepressant, which is interesting. Really? So it does kind of imply that most people's depression can actually just resolve itself if it is a bit of a circumstantial thing. And usually their body finds a way to kind of pull them out of it, or life changes. But, I'm not here to tell people whether they should take antidepressants or not, but it is something to be mindful of, is that some of the research on the antidepressants is maybe not as they're not as like benevolent as we've been led to believe. And I think a lot of the research that went into getting them approved by the FDA was cherry picked quite a bit.
Oh yeah. And obviously comparing what you're selling to these real big antidepressants, it's not the same thing that you're like. Those are probably like, if you take like a Xanax or something, it's going to have a much more drastic effect, much more noticeable, stronger effect than something like your thing. I imagine, I haven't tried it, but it's going to be probably a lower level, sort of almost subconscious type of feeling with it. Like you're not just taking a pill and then like 20 minutes later you're like, oh hey, look, I feel great all of a sudden. Like,
it really depends on the person. I mean, honestly, I do feel an effect from taking my own pills within 30 minutes.
Really?
And and very often people will take it, and then 2 hours later, then they're in a completely different state. Some people aren't really in tune with their body as much, and they'll take it for a month, and they're like, I didn't feel any difference.
Right.
And then you have people like me who take it, and in an hour I feel like drastically better. So
what are some of the things that you notice then? Like it's hard to describe how we feel, obviously. Like it's a hard thing to sort of pinpoint as what changes, but what are some of the things that you could point to as it having a noticeable effect when you take it?
For me, certainly like a mental energy. Like part of my depression is that my brain just feels like it's, kind of out of juice.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like a boost in mental energy and intellectual clarity. But also just I'm way less prickly, like I'm way less triggered by things. I'm able to I'm more resilient to stressful experiences. Whereas if I'm quite deficient and feeling a little bit like agitated, I might get upset a lot easier at something stupid like an object falling off the table or something.
Yeah. I think people can relate to what that's like. Like, I definitely know the feeling and different things. Like, one of the jobs I work, I have to work night shifts. So when I wake up the next day and I'm definitely depleted. Like, I go to bed at say 8 in the morning and wake up at like 1 in the afternoon. I get like 5 hours of sleep, and it's not very good sleep. And I wake up and my body hasn't had a chance to recover, and I'm irritable. I'm quick to snap at people. I have this feeling that I just want to like feed the tired. I just want to sit on the couch and eat crappy food, and I just have this fog that I hate feeling. It just really sucks, and I sometimes in those, not even in that in extreme state, but just sometimes when you just feel a little cloudy, if anything, what I want out of looking at like what to make myself healthier, I want just that clarity, that lightness, just feeling lighter and more energetic and ready to just go do things. That's kind of what I want out of anything. And your products definitely sound like worth a try anyway. I'd like to, check it out maybe and see if I can notice things. I think I am someone who maybe, I don't know if I'm out of touch with my body, but I've tried certain things before and like just been one of those people who's like, I have no idea. 'Cause I'm not very consistent either, like day to day. I'm not super consistent in my diet and things. I kind of go back and forth a lot, so it's really hard if I do feel good. It's hard for me to pinpoint what has made me feel good too.
Yeah, totally. That's a problem that I think a lot of people encounter, and so they aren't able to really figure out or draw correlations between activities or foods or whatever that are making them feel upset or pissed off the next day.
But that is the way to go. I mean, that's something I'm obviously pushing toward, and like just even like noticing like, oh hey, I eat pizza and I feel like crap. Maybe I won't do that. I'll try not to eat like a bunch of cheese, and noticing things like that. And it's definitely a direction I'm going down and learn. And like, I think, probably one of the biggest secrets to health is just being in touch with how you feel on stuff, and really like not putting too much research into like what other people are finding with stuff. You really have to trust yourself at a certain level, and it sucks because we have to do the research ourselves, but that's really the way to feel good, find out what works for you.
It's really about listening to your body, and doctors and health practitioners can be there to support you, but at the end of the day, like, you're the only person that can truly say what works for you. So
yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about the Vipassana thing, because it's interesting to me, because I've never done that either. I've never gone to any kind of meditation retreat, or I've experimented with meditation a little bit on my own, here and there, but really nothing drastic. And I wonder if you could compare that experience to, say, some of the experimentation you're doing with psychedelics earlier in your college years, as you were talking about.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I still use a lot of psychedelics, but not as often. There were definitely moments where I felt really similar to as if I were sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony or something. I don't know if I've quite grabbed on to a way I can really express that.
Yeah, it's hard.
But
it's hard to talk about.
It was a similar place of peace and surrendering, and of awareness, and of also just self introspection. It definitely felt like a familiar space that I had been in with psychedelic induced experiences.
And how many days into this do you feel like it took for you to actually be like in tune or calm enough and relaxed enough to really hone in on some of these feelings? Did it take a while?
Yeah, I would say like 2 or 3 days. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. So that is sort of doing it for like 6 days in a row or 10 days in a row is kind of almost necessary, I guess, huh? To really force people to just get into it, like day after day, get back to that place.
Yeah, I think from what I've heard, it's pretty typical for people to have the opinion that it takes like about 3 days to detox from the real world and then get into your stable practice. So yeah, there's definitely value to having multiple days, and it doesn't mean that there'd be anything wrong with doing like a 3-day one, because you know, any meditation's better than none. But yeah, to really like get something to stick, I feel like more than 3 days is pretty helpful.
Right. I'm just fascinated by this idea, and like just when we start talking about the nervous system and how it's affected by our mental states and these practices that we get into and how psychedelics affect that in a similar way. It's just funny. It seems like our culture has been very focused on the physical, like you said, like the doctors, or they don't take that holistic approach in the Western medicine practices here. But it really seems like that's what's coming next. Like that seems to be the frontier now that's being introduced to these practices, that we can balance this physical and the mental, and like I spoke with someone yesterday and we talked about the placebo effect. How interesting that is, how that the fact that that's real is actually mind-blowing. The fact that they can show a measurable 20% increase in sort of healing effects of people when they give them a sugar pill or something, and they think that they're being healed. And even in very like, I think I read a study where it was like knee surgeries, and they actually pretended to perform knee surgeries on people. They like cut them open, but then didn't actually perform the surgery, and then they found they healed faster than people who didn't. And it's just amazing, that stuff. So you know that like spending time meditating or really working with some of these psychedelic states, they can have such an immediate physical impact. It's really cool. And it's cool to know that that these are being studied and researched, and it's be coming to us here.
Yeah, I mean the placebo effect, like you said, it really highlights the power of our consciousness to make measurable healing changes in the body. And one of the things I find really interesting about the placebo effect is that it actually still works if the person knows it's a placebo. They've done studies, like I think they did like an IBS study, and the people, full disclosure, knew they were getting sugar pills, and they took them and they still got results. And so much that after the study was done, some of the people actually requested more of the sugar pills, fully knowing they were placebos, because it was helping.
That's
and
so
same
funny.
with animals. You can administer placebo to animals, and it creates an effect as well. So very fascinating.
That's pretty funny. I wonder if that's because people know about the placebo effect, so they're just like, yeah, I know if I believe that it's gonna work, it's gonna work. It's like kind of like The Secret or something, but that's funny.
But it wouldn't work for animals, I wouldn't think.
No, that's true.
Then.
That's true. They
I
wouldn't
think
know.
it really, not to get like too deeply philosophical, but my opinion on it is that all matter is consciousness, and we are all connected to the same network of consciousness.
Okay.
And to take any sort of medication, whether it's placebo or an active substance, there is the conscious intention of healing, even if it's from you to your pet or whatever, even if it is to an animal that allegedly doesn't know what's going on. Consciousness is aware that it has the intention of acting in a way that will heal ultimately itself, because we're all the same consciousness, So that's kind of my theory, is like it has to do with conscious intention of consciousness experiencing itself,
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. I like getting deeply philosophical. What do you mean?
Okay.
Everything's the same consciousness. When you say something like that, I visualize it like a pool above us all of like the consciousness we're tapping into, and we all sort of like have little streams of that or something. Is that kind of how you view it?
Yeah, kind of like the internet.
Right. Yeah. I see. And I've thought about it like the idea that our brains don't create consciousness. They just tune. It's like a frequency. We're just tuning in. We're little radio transmitters. We're just tuning into something else. So you think it's probably that not only all people have the same consciousness, but like everything around us is tuned into the same thing?
I think every bit of matter is conscious to some extent, and I think there are varying degrees of consciousness and sense of identity based on the complexity of how the molecules arrange themselves. So, for example, we see this pattern in nature that molecules have this innate sort of desire to arrange themselves in increasingly complex ways that ultimately makes them have different emergent properties. Does that make sense? Like, they're more than just the sum of their parts.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think I see what you mean.
So, for example, you could think of a human being or even like a bacteria as a bunch of molecules. But if I blend up a human being in a blender, all of the matter is still there, right?
Right.
If I just shake it, why doesn't it turn into a person?
Right.
Because it's not, that person is more than the sum of their parts. And so we see these trends in nature with this propensity for self-organizing structures. And if you look in evolution, that's kind of the track that things went. Started out as, gases and stuff. And then you started getting amino acids, and then you started getting RNA. And then at some point, the RNA figured out how to self-replicate. And then you get DNA, and then you started getting single-cell organisms like bacteria. And then they started working together to create multicellular organisms. And then multicellular organisms started having bacteria live inside of them. And now that's our mitochondria that is
and the question
generating
is,
energy.
why were they attracted enough to create that? Like, how does that, why?
Right.
And and the idea of there's the law of attraction, but also like if you look at like magnetism and also you look at and you'd know more about this than me. Start getting like subatomic, you're looking at like electrons and neutrons and how they attract, they need to balance out and sort of attract each other in certain ways and things like that. It's all very fascinating and speaks to that idea.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, why did these matter that are allegedly unconscious or inanimate, why did they choose to arrange themselves in ways that would ultimately result in living conscious life, such as human beings like you and I?
Yeah, I've always thought that. I've been in, when I was in college, I remember a philosophy class I took, and most of the people in the class with me were basically atheists, sort of science folk and there was always just they always just point to this idea of randomness, that we're like, oh, we're so lucky that things were just random enough that they happened to form in this way. And I never really bought into that very much, because it never made sense to me, how it's all just a random mistake. There's some kind of, whether it's conscious or not, there's a law of something going on behind things that are allowing them to attract to each other and create these forms and create these things. It's on some level it can't be random. That's what I believe anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you personally that there is some sort of creative intention for whatever reason that the universe wants to express. And as someone who studied science, I actually ran into that a lot. With my peers, they were quite atheist, and I was on a spiritual path. I was drinking ayahuasca, I was smoking DMT, doing mushrooms, and the more I learned about science, the more I just felt blown away, and I guess the more that I believed the universe to be intelligent and conscious and sentient. Funny. And I kept thinking, man, how can these people learn about all of these biochemical mechanisms and how these receptor proteins work and how they bind to things and how that creates some cascading event? I'm like, how could you look at that and think that's random? Somebody really smart thought about this and implemented it,
Right. It's funny. You can draw different people can draw totally separate conclusions from the same things. And I have trouble getting to that point, that atheistic view of things. I just don't connect with it. I can't get there, where it seems like they're just missing a step in the process. They're just oh yeah, well, these things are the way they are. And what science can't do, science has trouble doing sort of the chicken or the egg argument. It can't really point to what happened first or why things happen in the first place. Science is always in my view, it's kind of it's always a step behind because it has to measure things after they happen. So it's not really, it's kind of inevitably, you can't be in a flow state with science. It's a little bit behind what's going on. And that's just how you measure things. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Totally. Yeah. And I see, quite a bit of dogma around science. And, the scientific method is really useful. We've learned a lot from it, but it has a lot of limitations. And, I like to remind people that many scientific discoveries happened because there was an intuitive thought that someone should investigate something.
Right.
And if you don't honor your intuition, if you don't even acknowledge that intuition has value, or that these extra sensory perceptive experiences are real and have merits, then science wouldn't be where it is. Like Crick, Francis and Crick, or Francis Crick and Watson, whatever, they discovered the double helix of DNA. Right. Allegedly, he came to that conclusion while on LSD.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, and that's
there's been a number of visionary experiences with psychedelics, or even in dreams and stuff, where people have made scientific discoveries that were fundamental to understanding something in that field of science.
Right. Yeah, and like what I think science tries to do, and sort of inevitably can't, is that you want to sort of separate everything, and you want to have the controlled experiment. You want to remove all bias, all view, all consciousness from a situation, but you actually can't. You can't do that because you're observing it and you're creating the experiment, and you can't. Life is always sort of in flux. Things are always changing and moving. So you really can't, at the smallest level, you can't just remove all consciousness or from an experiment. Inevitably, there's going to be part of your bias, part of your theorizing, and even if it really is true what you said, that everything has a level of consciousness, then it's going to be reacting to other people's intent around it, and it just inevitably you can't 100% just only go by science. It's not going to show you. I mean, the question that was asked, there's a guy named Jordan Peterson who I've mentioned on every interview I've done lately because I've been listening to him a lot. He's a professor from Toronto in Canada, and one thing he says, oh God, I just forgot. Forgot what I was going to say. What was I just
Deeply
talking about?
Impactful quote.
Oh, okay. No, I got it. It was, he talks about science in this way, and that science can't tell you how to live. It can tell you sort of what things seem to be in a relation to you. We can talk about the material world, but it's really religion in some way, some aspect of spirituality or religion that actually shows you how to be a good person. How do you live a good life in the world? Science doesn't actually answer that question. It really can't, it seems like, because it's not asking the question.
Right. I mean, how can science prove if you love someone or not?
Right.
Oh, well, the person did this for her and did this for her and he married her. Well, that actually doesn't mean that they love that person. That's evidence that you can observe and measure. But yeah, I think that's a great example just to illustrate the limitations of science. It can't prove that you love somebody else,
Right. And I really like talking to someone like you who does study science and obviously respects science and has been in there and learning about ways it can help. It can actually really physically help people. But then you're not just stuck there. You're going beyond that as well and looking at all these other possibilities too. I really like talking to people like you who are into the holistic kind of idea of looking at things from every angle.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we start bridging the gap between science and spirituality, because in my mind, spirituality is just a category of phenomena that people feel is true, but don't have any way of scientifically validating it, which doesn't mean that it's not true. Because if you think about, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, however long, we still had beating hearts. We still had all the same organ systems that we do now, but we might not have had any way of studying them or knowing anything about them, which means that these ideas that we could have created about, oh, maybe there's this thing in our body that pumps blood or whatever, we can't say that that's true or not, and it's essentially a spiritual belief at that point.
Right. And yeah, and that's to be respected though as well, and that sometimes we have to make those leaps. But we go back to like the idea that we talked about earlier, that you can tell yourself stories too. So it is a slippery slope. So that's where science comes in, is it can prove things over time and show what's real and what's not. And that's important too, talking about all this stuff, talking about psychedelics and everything, because people can get delusional. You can go down paths that you tell yourself stories about, and you think you're on the right track and everything's right, but then you find out later the earth is round. Or we might find out it's flat, apparently, is what I hear now.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me, Caitlin. I really appreciate the time. I really enjoyed talking to you as well. You're very, you're good at explaining this stuff in a way that I can actually understand, which I appreciate, because often I don't get it.
Well, it doesn't do much good sharing information if people don't understand it, so.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks a lot.
Met my goal. Do you mind if I just give a quick shout out if anyone wants to get in touch with me or like learn more about the products or anything?
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. For sure.
Okay. Yeah. So if anybody wants to get in touch, ask me a question, or just connect, or check out the products that I manufacture, you can go on my website. It's EntheoZen.com, spelled ENTHEOZEN. Like I said, it's like the word entheogen, but EntheoZen. And I have the Transcend Mood Enhancement Stress Support product on there. It's also on Amazon. And I am coming out with a new product, hopefully within the next few months. It's a psychobiotic. It's basically a probiotic for brain and mood health, addressing the gut-brain connection that we were discussing. So, yeah. Feel free to, stay in touch and check those things out if you're interested in learning more. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, and thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me, Carl.